We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. Vicky Davis is here as well. It is the 17th of October, 2020. If you're listening at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on that date, we are in fact live. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to have you with us. And if you ever wanted to know what the show would sound like with a minimal show prep, you're about to find out. We have actually a lot of evergreen stuff. There's always stuff we haven't got to from previous shows and stuff that is also extremely important that will be fine. But we got a lot to talk about. I had a personal thing. I was just telling Vicky. Good morning, Vicky, by the way.
Good morning.
I was just telling Vicky before the show started that I had quite an unexpected personal thing happen with I don't know how many people out there, I don't know how much I've talked about it on the air, but my father-in-law is a cancer patient. And he has been undergoing chemotherapy and radiation, which I'm not thrilled about, and I tried to talk him out of it. Actually, I bought him Ty Bollinger's book, Cancer, Step Outside the Box. I don't know that it was ever touched, and it's one of those types of situations where, ultimately you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, sort of thing. I think the problem, there's a psychological aspect to the medical establishment and people who, he's not well versed in things that we talk about here and the truth movement and all that. I mean, they don't even have internet at their house. So they listen to a lot of news off of TV, if you can call it news anymore, more like propaganda. So, I mean, in many respects, they're still conned in many respects. And I talk to them a lot about current affairs and try to wake them up and try to show them that, look, what you're being told is a lie, and here's why. And but be that as it may, I mean, when it comes to medical decisions, it's one of those things that is a personal thing, and ultimately you can only do so much to lead people onto the right path, especially when they are in a situation where, I mean, they're faced with a life or death thing, and and this thing has advanced over the course of a number of years. So he had gone through chemotherapy and radiation, and this is Michelle's dad. And this growth had, evidently it killed the growth. He quit bleeding, but at the same time, it's also killing him. And he had gone off their chemotherapy and radiation because he had completed the whole thing. And he told my wife and me that he had never wanted to go through any more of that again and all this. So we're listening outside on the phone as the doctor talks him into doing more chemotherapy. And when he got back into the car, and we're dumbfounded by this, because we're outside, because obviously a lot of these medical places now, because due to the COVID nonsense, they make you wait outside. You're not even allowed to be in there in the room. So when he got back into the car, I really tried to tell him, I was like, look, these guys are making literally a killing on you. And anyway, he went ahead and went through with it because the doctor made a very good sales pitch, and then we got the call late Thursday night, that there was an emergency. He was doubled over in pain. My brother-in-law came out and drove him and this was late Thursday evening. Maybe even, it was actually early Friday morning, to be honest with you. It was after midnight. And my brother-in-law took him to the hospital, and they said that they thought he was having a heart attack. And so they rushed him over to another medical facility, a different place, by ambulance, and the surgeons were there waiting to operate. Well, it turns out it wasn't a heart attack, thankfully, but there was other things that had happened, and he did have to have an emergency surgery, and the chemotherapy had killed part of his colon. So there's a lot of things going on. Anyway, I told that story all to tell you this, that number one, if you would pray for him, that would be great. And also my brother-in-law, or my cousin Chase, has also had a really bad accident where a drunk driver pulled out in front of him, and he rolled his car, and he's got a number of broken bones and all kinds of stuff, problems with his brain. I think he's going to be okay. But if you could pray for him as well, that would be wonderful. But there's a lot going on. And significantly, I made 2 trips to Ypsilanti yesterday and back. It's an hour there, and so that significantly cut into show prep time. But, thankfully, we got all kinds of stuff to talk about, Vicky.
Yeah, it's your story is interesting. I've always been very ambivalent about what they call alternative medicines. I've always preferred to trust, standard physicians and medical practice. But after this whole COVID thing, the COVID thing plus the electronic medical records, the sharing of records and all of that, I have zero trust in the medical profession at this point.
Yeah, and who could blame you, Mm-hmm. It's the more you understand about how cancer is, the more you read up on really how the thing grows and everything. And I'm certainly wouldn't even begin to call myself a medical expert in any way, shape, or form. But there are things that you can learn about it from people who have actually been effective at retarding cancer and reversing it, and they've been persecuted relentlessly. There's a number of names that come to mind, but anyway, suffice it to say that just cutting down on sugar, for one thing, can go a long way to retard the development of cancer, because sugar feeds on cancer. So, and we're not giving medical advice here, just to be clear. So, there you go.
You mean cancer feeds on sugar?
Yeah. Did I say it backwards?
Yeah, that's all right though. We knew what you meant.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So I'm kind of tired. I'm kind of sleep deprived. So you'll have to forgive me. But anyway, getting off of the personal stuff and into more of what's going on in our country, you found this. We had the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation hearings, and we've told you folks last week that this is not really a good pick, and I have every reason to believe she's going to be confirmed. It was I thought, kind of a non-contentious, from what I saw of it, and I mean, there was a lot of hours there, but from what I saw of it, was really pretty gentle, pretty non-confrontational, a far departure from the last one. and where they just went after him, and it got really nasty. I think they're, and we kind of predicted, I think, last week that she's going to sail through with no problem. Because, to be honest with you, what's not to like? I mean, she's a corporate shill. She's a corporatist. She's all in the tank with the police state. And so they're going to be very happy to have her on the Supreme Court, I think, despite all the theatrics. And I think that is what it is, Vicky.
I think every hearing that Congress has, it's all political theater. You know what bothered me the most about Amy Coney Barrett is that she adopted 2 children from Haiti and the reason why is because of that woman in Idaho who went to Haiti to basically she was stealing children. Now I don't think that was the case with Amy Coney Barrett, but it seems to me like that she kind of, I have to think that she did that as an insurance policy against an accusation of racism. You can't accuse her of racism if she has 2 black children.
Right. Yeah, well...
Now, I'm sure she's a really good mother, and I know they'll
I don't know if she's
a really good home to those children.
Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. How do we know?
I still think there was a political purpose behind it.
Yeah, I don't know anything about her parenting skills or the lack thereof, I mean, she's a professional woman.
If there was anything there, you can bet the Democrats would have ferreted it out.
Yeah, I wouldn't be so sure about that, because despite all the theatrics, number one, it would have to be public information. Number two, despite all the theatrics, they're very good at focusing their attentions on certain areas and neglecting ones that might really make a difference. I do that all the time. Selective information. Hey, look over here, look over here. I'm not saying she's not a good parent. I'm just saying we don't know. The point is that she's not a good Supreme Court justice pick if, in fact, half of what Chuck Baldwin wrote in the article that I mentioned last week, if half of what he says is true. And I have every reason to believe that it is true.
I didn't read that article. I'll have to go find it and read it.
I'll tell you what. I'll pull it up.
What I did like about her, though, is that she is a textualist, meaning that she reads the law as it's written, and she applies the principles, the constitutional principles, and then comes to a decision. Because in listening to the hearings, and I sent you an email on this, I realized something really important about the Democrats and the whole leftist socialist paradigm is that they are working on a philosophy of outcome-based jurisprudence. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that they have the outcome that they want in mind.
I love that phrase.
They tailor their case or their decision based on the outcome that is desired rather than what the law says.
Right, exactly. And I love that.
We can see that with the case against General Flynn. Mm-hmm. And what that judge, his name escapes me at the moment, what that judge is doing, he's trying to do everything he can to achieve an outcome that was predetermined. They wanted to get General Flynn, and that judge has done everything but stand on his head to do it. I mean, violating the law as it's written.
Yeah, I remember, Vicky. Yeah. I remembered what part of what my problem was with her. she supported J.B. Pritzker's lockdown efforts. That was one thing. In fact, I think we even had that on the show last week about that. We played a clip where we had a constitutional expert, I think it was a constitutional attorney, talking about how she supported Pritzker's lockdown efforts in Illinois. So that's very, very problematic, because these I don't think there's anywhere that we've had in recent history that has more violated our individual liberty than these lockdown orders. And there's no end to it in sight. I just want to say, Joe Skousen, Chuck Baldwin in this article quotes Joe Skousen as saying the following: "The recent excitement over a new Supreme Court appointment prompted me to do some research. I was initially very enthused about Amy Coney Barrett. After constitutional attorney Robert Barnes threw cold water on the choice and expressed his support for Judge LaGoya, I did some research and listened to talks and interviews with Judge Barrett. She impresses me as being somewhat detached and devoid of empathy and warmth. She stressed that a judge may not let personal preference color her decisions. She has gone on to say that also in the hearings as well, which, for a you do want them to be to make decisions based upon the Constitution and historical intent of what the Founding Fathers intended, what they intended. So I think I don't know if textualism fits into, I think supporting documents from what the Founding Fathers said, original source documents, and this is me talking, not him, I think that should come into the decision, not personal preference, obviously, and certainly not activism. But what did the Founding Fathers mean by this text?
Well, she's not. The Constitution is not the primary focus. The primary focus is the case presented by the attorneys. Yeah, but
the whole role of the court is to decide whether or not these cases, whether or not the matter of controversy, what the Constitution is in relation to that. That's what the whole purpose of the thing is.
Well, like the decision on the ACA hinged on whether or not the penalty was a tax, right?
That's what Justice Roberts claimed. No, I think the case with the Affordable Care Act, as I recall, was whether or not it was constitutional, and John Roberts, unless I'm mistaken, as I remember it, John Roberts went out of his way to conjure up that it is, based upon the fact that it's a tax, and that the federal government has the right to issue a tax. So they made law.
It was a tax because of when I researched I've been researching the changes to our healthcare system for a long time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they did in the redesign of healthcare was something called managed competition, which means that basically they were trying to privatize welfare and blend it into so that your insurance system would be a blended system of employer-provided insurance, the welfare rolls, Medicaid, whatever, trying to blend that all into a single system of health insurance with subsidies provided by the government based on the actuarial statistics or actuarial findings in the background, and basically the government becoming the reinsurer for people that couldn't afford to pay for insurance for the kind of insurance that they need. So on that basis, with the managed competition system, the penalty, which is a contribution to the system, it makes the system really a government-sponsored kind of program, so the amount that they assess you is a tax.
Yeah.
But the problem is that nobody ever explained it in those terms so that people understood what the system was, but it was because they tried to create a single system of health insurance with multiple providers participating.
Here's the problem, okay, with declaring it a tax. If it's a tax, and that's the only way it was able to stand. That's the only way that John Roberts, who isn't really a conservative at all, by the way, but that's a conversation for another day. The only way that it's able to stand is that it's a tax. Since it's a tax, since they declared it a tax, then it's not constitutional, and I'll tell you why. Because at the time that the legislation was being worked on, there were two bills. There was one that was started in the Senate and one that started in the House. Originally, they were going to work on passing the House version. Something happened, and that faltered, and they fell back on passing the Senate version. The problem is, the Constitution is very clear that financial bills have to start in the House. So, as a result of that, since they passed the Senate version, that right there is your recipe for getting it overturned if the case ever came before the Supreme Court to declare it unconstitutional. Now, I don't see anybody talking about that. There's actually only one person that I've ever seen that has mentioned it, and that's Ben Swan. But most people are just, they're completely unaware that was that's how this whole thing was made, is what I'm trying to say.
Which committee, do you know which committees were working on it?
No, I don't.
Because it wasn't just a spending bill.
It was
a policy bill. They were creating a whole new system.
I don't think it matters, though, what committee it was. It's got to be a House committee.
They had two bills, one in the Senate, one in the House, and they just needed to resolve the differences.
But it's got...
I don't know. I think that's kind of a shaky argument, actually.
I don't think it's shaky at all. I mean, the Constitution says financial bills have to start in the House. If it's a tax, then it's got to start in the House.
Yeah, but you're saying if it's a tax after the fact, after the decision.
Yeah, but they said it was a tax after the fact.
Supreme Court decision that it was a tax.
But they said it was I mean, come on. They didn't. This whole thing didn't start. It didn't. I mean, we could debate health care and whether or not health care is good or constitutional, or whether the government should even be involved in it. I understand that people need health care. It's something people need, and we can certainly make the case that with all the money the government's wasting overseas and giving untold trillions to the military, that something could be done with regard to health care. The problem is every single thing that the government gets involved in empowers the government against the people. So if they get control of all the health care system as they have, ultimately they have total control over your life. So that's the problem I have with it.
Congress destroyed our health care system. They absolutely destroyed it, beginning in about 1979 when they passed the ERISA Act. So, and they've been just progressively destroying it ever since.
Yeah. Did you want to expand on exactly what the ERISA Act did?
Well, the biggest thing it did was that it allowed the big employers to become self-insured, meaning that they pulled out the biggest populations of healthy people out of the insurance pools. And these big employers just became self-insured. They just pay the medical bills of their employees, and they pay the insurance companies a fee just to process the claims.
Yeah.
So, but the insurance companies could no longer have that base population upon which to rely for distribution of the risk. So as they continued on slicing and dicing up the insurance pools, the price of insurance kept going up and up and up. It was absolutely predictable.
Yeah. Well, the other problem that I see is that this whole thing creates the platform for which the Cloward-Piven strategy is executed, and that is that they overrun the welfare rolls, and they use that to destroy the country. I mean, the biggest problem I see with all of this is that they are pushing for illegals to get health care on the public dime, as America's whole gets deeper and deeper and deeper in debt. Well,
the Democrats don't recognize America as a sovereign country anymore. They want open borders. They are actually the instrument of the destruction of our nation.
Okay. We have a break coming up. Let me go ahead and take the break. Remember your thoughts. And, folks, you're welcome to join in if you want. 610-600-1776. 610-600-1776. Or toll-free 844-646-8376. That's toll-free 844-6-GOVERN. We'll be back here in a moment.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Governor...
Welcome back to the broadcast. This is Govern America. It continues to be the 17th of October, 2020, as we are live at 11:32 Eastern Daylight Time. GovernAmerica.com is the website for the show. That's GovernAmerica.com. And my email address is radio@governamerica.com. Go ahead and give your information out there, Vicky.
Okay, yeah, my new website is thetechnocratictyranny.com. My email address is eyeswideoopen@channelingreality.com, and channelingreality.com is my older website.
All right, very good. You were about to say something when I had to cut you off earlier.
Yeah, I was kind of unfair to Democrats there. It's not entirely the Democrats who want open borders with Mexico and Canada, but they are more vocal about it than the Republicans. The Republicans are kind of closet traitors in terms of destroying the sovereignty of our nation. Mm-hmm. They voted for NAFTA. They voted for the World Trade Organization. So they are guilty right alongside with the Democrats. But the Democrats are more supportive of it. Mm-hmm. With destroying our borders.
Yeah, as we've always said, or I have always said, destroying America is really a bipartisan effort. I think the problem that we have today, and the reason why we can sound partisan at times on this show, is because we spend so much time talking about the unbelievable corruption of the Democratic Party. I mean, the truth is both parties are corrupt, but the kind of stuff that's going on, and we'll talk about Joe Biden today a little bit, because some documents have just come out. He's running a scam very much similar to the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Global Initiative, where it's pay for play. And this is all the stuff going back to Hunter Biden and Burisma. I mean, that was really kind of just the tip of the iceberg. More stuff is coming out, including stuff from Ukraine, stuff from China. I mean, these people are compromised as the day is long. It's unbelievable. And social media sites are covering up for it. Twitter and Facebook won't even allow, or at least this week haven't even allowed the stories to be posted. I mean, they've been locking people's accounts down just for posting the link.
Well, they locked down the account of the New York Post. The New York Post looks like a tabloid, but they've been around for a very long time. They apparently are one of the oldest newspapers in the country. It was started by Alexander Hamilton. And so they were always kind of in competition with the New York Times, because the New York Times always had a leftist slant.
Yeah, well, they're the mouthpiece of the establishment.
The New York Post was conservative.
Yeah, the New York Times is the mouthpiece of the establishment. I think it was one of the Rockefellers that thanked them for their silence on the conspiracy for global governance many, many years ago at a Bilderberg conference, because had they shined the light on the conspiracy, it would have never been able to take place. So there you go. I mean, they're all in the tank. But I wanted to finish up real quick before we get to the Biden stuff with the Amy Coney Barrett stuff, because there's some relevant stuff in there regarding that. But first, though, this Joel Skousen, he was talking about her and says in her lecture at Jacksonville University in 2016, Amy Coney, he says the impression was communicated that Amy Coney Barrett was more partial to Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. She praised Justice Scalia for siding with a flag burner in a court decision. You know, to be honest with you, I don't have a problem with that, because even though I wouldn't burn a flag, I don't like governments telling you can't. So, and there may be other reasons that one might want to burn a flag. For instance, you're not in favor of the federal government.
I disagree on that. I think burning a flag is incitement to riot. It's...
Well, what if you're a states' rights person and you're against the federal overreach, and so you're burning the flag for that reason? I mean, the thing is, you and I don't have to agree with the person doing the burning, but the person doing that is their statement. You might... We don't have to agree with it. But to have the government come and say that they're going to arrest you or have some kind of a penalty for it, no, that's not the government's job. It's called free speech. You can say whatever you want. I mean, the whole point of free speech is whether or not do you not have the right to say what you want to say. And even though that isn't physical speech, it is an action which amounts to speech. I just don't think it's the government's job to be telling you what you can and can't say about the government.
Well, as a matter of principle, I consider speech to be speech. And a Supreme Court decision also was that corporations' campaign contributions are free speech.
So if someone...
I vehemently disagree with that.
So should the government be able to tell you if you have a sign in your yard that you can't have a sign in your yard because you don't have that that's not really speech?
Certainly not. That's your property. That's your right to put up a sign.
But should
that's
the government...
That's a different thing, and a sign does express speech.
It's not actual... Well, we could debate this.
Obviously, the burning of a flag is symbolic.
Yes, and symbolism is a form of speech.
Contributions is not speech, and it's not symbolic. Well, I don't know if you could call it symbolic. It's not really.
Symbolism is a form of conveyance of a message, and that is a form of speech. That's why the Illuminati uses all these signals.
That's true.
That's why the Masons, you see all these pictures now everywhere with people covering their eyes, for heaven's sake. Have you seen this? You been following this at all?
What?
All these actors and actresses and all these various people with one eye covered? It's everywhere.
No,
it's everywhere.
What are they trying to convey?
Well, they're trying to convey that evidently they're conveying that they're under control of the Illuminati, I guess. Because they're covering up their eye, very much like the all-seeing eye on the back of the dollar bill at the top of the pyramid.
Are you sure they're not harassing that member of Congress that lost his eye?
No. No, I'm quite sure of that. No, it's everywhere.
Well,
it's
if
everywhere.
they're trying to symbolize piracy,
this has been going on for years.
I would have to agree with them because the system, the way that the technocratic system, the way they've set up the economy, allowed pirates to come into our country and just loot everything.
Mm-hmm.
And even Norm Mineta. Norm Mineta was one of the authors of the Intermodal Surface Transportation Act of 1991, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And he even said that they were pirates. So, anyway, I don't know how many people know that or understand it or not, but
yeah. Well, I don't know, but anyway, we could agree to disagree on that, on the flag burning thing. But he says an eye opener with respect to the sentiment. I want to appoint someone pro-life. She insisted that this is not the correct criteria to apply in selecting someone for the Supreme Court. We shouldn't be putting people on the court who share our policy preferences. See, I actually agree with that.
I do too.
I will get to the point where I disagree with. She commented that she didn't believe the right to abortion would change. She said that this dispassionately and offered no hint of disapproval. She went on to say that biological boys using girls' bathrooms is a who decides issue. She never suggested that the idea is outrageous. To her, the highest law is the Constitution and its interpretation. Well, I think she's focused on interpreting it. You know, see, that's the thing. These social issues, here's where I disagree with him, I guess. Because these social issues you don't want a justice to be activist. You want a justice who is going to look at the Constitution and base the Constitution on what the founders intended and make the decision of controversy based upon what did the founding fathers intend in the Constitution. Now, some of these social issues, to be frank with you, would have never been imagined probably by the Constitution. I mean, people being confused. I mean, yeah, they had homosexuality back then, but I don't know. You know, there's a lot of things have just gotten really crazy today, and I'm sure they had their crazy people back then, but I don't know that it was quite as crazy as it was today.
Yeah, I kind of think you have it a little backwards. What they do is they look at the case in controversy, and they look at the language. As a judge, she's not allowed to consider policy preferences, which is the difference between the leftist judges and the rightist judges, and that goes back to what I was saying about outcome-based jurisprudence.
Mm-hmm.
The Democrats have a policy preference that they are trying to implement, and the conservatives are trying to prevent that. But the judge is not supposed to use their own policy preference to make the decision.
Right.
They are supposed to analyze the text, the specific focus, the controversy in the case, and make a decision based on that, based upon whether government has the authority to do what they're trying to do under constitutional principles or not, you know?
Yeah, but it should be totally based on the Constitution. And if it's a controversy of law that's brought up, is this law constitutional? And, you know, according to the constitutional text, but the constitutional text is influenced by what the Founding Fathers intended in the original documents. And you've got the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, the debates, the primary source documents, what they said about it at the time. You know, so it's actually quite an extensive volume of knowledge a qualified justice needs to have. But let me share with you what constitutional attorney Robert Barnes said about Barrett. He says, Barrett sided with the government on almost every civil rights case, every big employer case, every criminal case, while also siding with the government on the lockdowns. And I guess that's one of my biggest beefs on this, is if you can think that the lockdowns are constitutional, then that to me disqualifies you as a Supreme Court justice. Just
I'd have a hard time arguing with you against that.
Purely on that.
I agree.
She sided with the government, he says, on uncompromised takings, on excusing First Amendment infringements and Fourth Amendment violations. Barrett exclaimed the benefits of Jacobson, the decision that greenlit forced vaccines and carved out an emergency exemption to constitutional protection in public health or emergency cases used to justify forced sterilizations and detention camps.
Yeah, I would wonder if that case, if they brought the case under the emergency. There's the U.S. has been under an emergency order for many years, and that recognizes exceptions to law based on the emergency. So if they brought a case under that, then I could see how she could decide that. But then the question is, how long can an emergency exist before it becomes clear that they are trying to grab extra power, extra constitutional power out on a permanent basis?
And I would argue also that if she's going on the emergency powers, the exceptional or extraordinary emergency powers, extra constitutional emergency powers, then she's playing along with the game. And
that's true.
That also would disqualify her. He continues, he says, Barrett excused or immunized questionable police conduct in almost every seizure case or use of force case she came across, with the fact patterns that will make her easily demolished in the court of public opinion in the age of George Floyd. Well, I would argue, number one, the court of public opinion, the public would have to be informed properly. And number two, George Floyd, everyone gets George Floyd wrong. I have a real problem with this, Vicky, because everybody has thrown Derek Chauvin, the officer, under the bus on both the left and the right. Number one, I will say, in this police officer's defense, number one, he has a right to a fair trial, and he is innocent until proven guilty. So let's just put that out there right there, because nobody else is saying this. Number two, George Floyd was a criminal who was high as a kite. He was strung out. He was already having difficulty breathing. There was other video that was released later on that didn't get media attention, but he was already saying he couldn't breathe before the officer ever put his knee on his neck. Okay? Number three, he was violently resisting arrest, and the tactic, while we may not like how it looks, or we certainly wouldn't want to imagine ourselves with a knee on our neck. I don't care what skin color you are. And by the way, to me, that doesn't matter at all what skin color the guy is. What matters to me is the circumstances surrounding the actual event. What was going on and who was to blame for the thing, because that video that shows with the officer restraining him in that manner doesn't tell the whole story. And nobody seems to care anymore about what happened before the event, before the record was hit on the button to start that video from happening, or to start that video.
Right. Well, and let's go back to the beginning.
There's one. Let me just finish this up. There's one more thing I want to point out about that, because this is really important. At the time that was being used, that form of restraint was being used, it was an approved measure for officers to use. Okay? Now we may not like it. Frankly, I don't like it. But he was using an approved method for restraint at a time when he couldn't figure apparently figure out any other way to restrain him. And then and the ambulance came and put George Floyd in the back of the ambulance. But my point is the autopsy report didn't say he died from asphyxiation. The autopsy report said he died from the drugs as a result of the drugs that were in his system. And of course the family hired somebody to do an autopsy that conflicted with that. But, you get what you pay for. I mean, the point is the official autopsy said he didn't die of asphyxiation. So those are the facts. And it's unfortunate that in this day of extreme rhetoric and extreme political partisan agendas and trying to stir the masses up in a riotous eruption of violence and civil unrest, that facts don't matter anymore. All right, I'm done. Go ahead.
Well, and that's right. My first problem was what Barnes said is the, quote, court of public opinion. In a case like this, public opinion shouldn't mean anything. And
totally agree.
The left is waging a cultural revolution on our country. And it is, let's call it, outcome-based media. Mm-hmm. Truth doesn't matter. There is an outcome that the leftist media wants, that these leftist groups want, and they will twist the facts in whatever way they need to do so that the conclusion is the one that they want. And it's that dishonesty that they use. Dishonesty is a weapon against the larger society. So when you talk about the court of public opinion, the public is not getting the truth, the facts. The public They're getting a distorted and twisted version.
They're largely morons. Let's just say it. I hate to say that, but they are. Our public has deliberately been dumbed down. The school systems don't teach how government is supposed to work. This is the other thing about this, is that as time goes on, we're hearing more and more. We hear nothing about the Congress, as far as their elections are concerned. We might hear a little bit, but we have very little compared to the executive branch. Everything is about the president, the president, the president, the president. But we don't hear about local races. We don't hear about hardly anything with regard to so the impression, I guess, is what I'm getting at. The impression is left in the minds of the people that we have a king, that we have a monarch, that we have somebody who is basically a dictator that can have unmitigated power and do whatever the heck he wants, or she, if that happens later on. The point is that that's not true constitutionally. The media will never talk about the Constitution and what it actually says and the balance of power, the checks and balances that are supposed to exist in government, because they don't want the public to know.
They've been distorting our form of government for over half a century. Mm-hmm. So, I have to say I was even a victim of it. They didn't teach us very much history when I was in high school. And I only took a little bit, one college course in political science, mm-hmm. When I was at college. And so our schools have been derelict in teaching people about our form of government, but they've gradually been changing our form of government intentionally through the trade agreements.
Yeah.
But it has been slow and incremental up until 1993, actually, when the Clinton administration took over, and then they radically changed our form of government, with the internet and redesigning our systems of government for technology that was available. Mm-hmm. Centralizing control, and that's not our form of government.
Yeah, exactly. Circling back around real quick, I want to finish this up. Barnes says, Barrett justified discriminating against someone participating in protests over the killing of his brother in a case that will make it easy headlines for her critics to make it look like the misconduct excuser. Her actual record, there's a typo here. To make it look the misconduct excuser, her actual record says it is. She is. That's kind of written, kind of confusing. Barrett justified regulatory takings without compensation and government discrimination by siding with the government's version once again, like she has in a near record-setting 95% plus of the cases. Barrett found a dubious standing excuse to deny citizens the right to prevent the corrupt misappropriation of property for the building of the Obama Library. This is the kind of elite, back-scratching, Roberts-like jurists like Barrett do. So there are other things here, and he brings up the lockdowns and shutdowns, which is one of my biggest problems with her, is that she's on the side of that. Chuck Baldwin says this also means, he says, not. He's going off on the evangelicals who are supporting him. But Barrett's record is troubling in many cases, with a ruling that gives the Democrats in Illinois blanket authority to shut down society based on COVID-19 mass hysteria standing out as particularly heinous. She concurred with the majority in Illinois Republican Party et al. Versus J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, to keep the illegal lockdown in place and allow Democrats to rip up the Constitution under the guise of safety. She hid behind the precedent of Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905 in an attempt to avoid culpability for her decision. So I'll leave that there, but I thought it was important enough. And like I say, I have every reason to believe she will be confirmed. They're going to be holding a floor vote or a committee vote on October 22nd. The floor vote will take place at probably either the next day or shortly thereafter. And I have every reason to believe she'll sail right through because she's one of them. She's an elitist, and that's what I got to say about it. So anyway, we're at the top of the hour, though. Hour number 2 straight ahead. Don't go away, folks.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is the second hour of Govern America. It continues to be the 17th of October, 2020, noon Eastern Time. We are live. If you're listening at that time, if you're not, then we aren't. It's just that simple. Vicky, one thing I wanted to talk about real quickly here, we were just wrapping up our discussion of Amy Coney Barrett and the confirmation hearings this week, and there's a lot of other things going on, but I did want to revisit the interesting article that was written by Sandra Strokoff, senior counsel at the time of the Office of Legislative Affairs at the U.S. House of Representatives. She wrote years ago a piece which, to my knowledge, I believe it's still up there. And I know it's up on governamerica.com. I'll put it up in the show notes for people to read it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but which we have read before, but basically she's laying out how the Office of Legislative Counsel writes the legislation for the representatives, and how she goes into detail about how they make it a point of writing everything, multiple copies of the same bill, and they are right basically in the center of everything that's going on in the House of Representatives. And I think it's fascinating as you read this because she gives a rare look inside as to what really goes on behind the scenes. It's called How Our Laws Are Made, a Ghostwriter's View. And she openly refers to themselves as ghostwriters. They are the ghostwriters for the legislators, for the representatives. And they write the bills, and this goes right in line with the very teachable moment that happened on the Senate side of things. Now, that's the House of Representatives, but on the Senate, when they were holding the confirmation hearings, and good for you for picking up on this, Vicky, because, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Because there was a teachable moment when Senator John Cornyn revealed what goes on behind the scenes in the Congress, and in his case in the Senate, with regard to legislative markup.
I had the great privilege of serving on the state court bench for 13 years, and so when I came to Congress, I'd never served in the legislature before, and so it was quite an eye-opening experience for me. For example, after one vote on the Senate floor, after the vote was over, one senator got to the microphone. He said, "Now for a little legislative history." That was kind of shocking to me, but you understand where I'm getting at. And one reason I appreciate your approach and Justice Scalia's approach to statutory interpretation and emphasis on the text rather than legislative history, this is a way for somebody who lost the vote to come in and try to then tilt the scales of justice in their favor by adding some ex parte legislative history. And then imagine my shock when I serve, as I do now, on the Finance Committee.
Okay, let me just stop it right there. Why would they want to add, quote-unquote, legislative history to a bill that's passed? To me, and see if you concur, Vicky, to me that would be so that the court later on, when it's contested, could interpret it in accordance with that, quote-unquote, legislative history. So I think that's what's going on here.
That's exactly what it is. And I remember there was a case before the Supreme Court involving that very issue as to whether or not they could take into consideration legislative history. And so that becomes really important, because what that does, it allows the left or the right, depending on whose ever legislative history they want to use, it allows them to insert into the court record what they say was the legislative intent.
Exactly.
Which goes back to what I was saying about outcome-based
jurisprudence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, that's a huge
incredible find
issue, and it was and I was shocked myself as he was saying that.
And I picked up something entirely different from it because, well, you probably picked it up too, the shadow government aspect of the whole thing.
Oh, that's totally what it is. Yes, it's the government behind the facade that we see, which is our elected representatives.
Yeah.
You know.
So anyway, continuing on.
When we mark up legislation in the Finance Committee, we don't actually get to look at legislative text. It's kind of surreal. It's they call it a notion.
Okay, now listen to this very carefully. I'm going to back this up, folks, because this is so important what he's saying here. Everyone needs to listen very carefully. Think about what Sandra Strokoff says on the U.S. House of Representatives side. She is the head of this Office of Legislative Counsel, where she's saying that we know what everybody's up to because we have all the bills and we're writing all the bills for all the sides, both Republicans and Democrats. We have it all. And so we're writing a copy for this person and a copy of that person. Sometimes we write multiple copies of the same bill in just different words to make it look like they're different. I mean, that's what she said here. I mean, this isn't conspiracy theory. This is straight off the U.S. House of Representatives' own website. And she's coming right out and telling you. And I'm amazed that the thing has stayed there so many years. You would think that this, but nobody cares. Nobody looks at it. Except me, a few of us. But
I hope you put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll put a link to it.
I'd like to see that.
I got it on Govern America. And I have the link at the top. I mean, I wrote a little note to begin with. And I said it was originally published here, and I put the link, the hyperlink directly to the original, and just in case they take it down, because this was so important. And the last time I checked, and I'll click on the here now and look and see if it's still there. And it's not still there. Interesting. It says page not found.
Huh.
Wow. Well, I got the original.
We'll leave the original link because we might be able to find it in the way back.
I will leave the original, but I've got the article, and maybe they moved it. Sometimes they revamp websites, and it might still be out there somewhere but for years it stayed there. And she's coming right out there and saying, "Look, we write all this stuff. We know what's going on." And, so it goes in line with what he's saying here on the Senate side, because if there's one of these legislative counsel in the House of Representatives, certainly, of course, the Senate has them too, because they're dealing with all this stuff. So what he's saying here about the legislative process is remarkable. It's remarkable, Vicky, for a senator to come out and reveal what he's revealing here.
When I serve, as I do now, on the Finance Committee, when we mark up legislation in the Finance Committee, we don't actually get to look at legislative text. It's kind of surreal. They call it a notional markup. In other words, we end up voting on sort of a notion or concept, and then somebody in the Leg Counsel's office writes up the text. Very strange. And then there's this issue of, I know in the judiciary and in the legal profession generally, there's been a big movement toward plain language so people can understand clearly. You have to unlearn some of the lessons you learned in law school, particularly writing on law reviews and the like, where you seemingly are rewarded for this really obtuse, impenetrable language, and of course where you use Latin phrases and things like that. But the plain language movement in the legal profession strikes me as a very important movement, and I yearn for those days when perhaps Congress can embrace that so we can speak more clearly, so more people can understand, and not delegate our legislative responsibilities to staff.
What do you think of that? I mean, this is
I
proof.
about jumped out of my chair.
This is your deep state shadow government working behind the scenes, and this is a U.S. senator telling you about it.
Right. Well, the thing is that it's so true. The devil is in the details. And sometimes, a major case will depend on whether there was an and or an or.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or where the comma was in a sentence.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you have legislative assistants writing it, I from my point of view, the way I consider it that that our members of Congress are committing a fraud.
Mm-hmm. They are.
Because they are not doing the job that they were elected to do. Yeah, because we know darn good and well, when they have one of these major omnibus bills, they don't read it. They don't read them. They don't know what's in there.
Yeah, it's remarkable to me. This is not conspiracy theory. I mean, he's telling you exactly how it is. They vote on an ideal or a concept, and not the actual language of the bill. The bills aren't. Then they've admitted that the bills aren't read by them. They didn't read the bill. So when they come up with it, like the Affordable Care Act, these huge mega bills, and this Sandra Strokoff mentions that in her piece about the era of the mega bill. But there's no way these legislators could possibly read a bill that's 1,000 pages, let's just say, or even I mean, they don't have that kind of time, especially when they're out confronting. And I would say, and I have said through the years, that that's an automatic no vote. If they're wanting to push a bill that is hundreds and hundreds of pages and don't give you time to read it, but they don't read any of them. They vote on the concept. They vote on the idea. Here's what it is, and, we'll come up with a language later. Well, now we know how all of this stuff ends up in these bills. Now we understand how all of this crazy, whacked out garbage comes. And now we understand exactly why our country is in such peril. Economically, financially, and every other way.
Okay, now let's add to this a little bit. I can't remember which member of Congress it was. Might have been an Idaho congressman that really only served one term. But what he found out when he went back to Washington, D.C., was that he could not bring his aid from Idaho to Washington, D.C. Somebody else hires the aides for the members of Congress. And I'm not sure who that is. Is it the party leadership or is it the Republican National Committee? Either way, if it's the leadership or the Republican National Committee, then as far as I can see within the organizational structure of the party system, we have unelected people,
deep state,
basically putting people into positions where they can control the legislation, control what happens in this country. And the organization that I'm talking about specifically is the National Endowment for Democracy and the 4 institutes that are associated with NED.
Let's even take it even further and talk again about the fact that these committee hearings, in order for people to be on these committees, the members of the committees, the parties that are involved charge the elected representatives or senators fees that are so exorbitant, it would make it hard for especially a junior, a freshman committee member to be able to pay these enormous, gigantic fees. So,
which I think should be illegal.
Yes, it should be illegal.
They shouldn't be allowed to sell a seat on a committee.
Absolutely.
I mean, what?
But what it does, Vicky, is
the whole system is so rotten and corrupt.
It opens the door wide. In fact, I would argue it invites corruption, because you have all of these. Who's going to pay the fees in that case? It's going to be special interests. It's going to be lobbyists. It's going to be corporate governance. Corporations. So we were talking. We're getting ready to talk about later on Joe Biden and all of the corruption that's going on with the pay for play. We had the Clintons, the Clinton Global Initiative, and all the pay for play stuff that was going on when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And I think that was one of the biggest problems with her not getting reelected, because they were planning on having her in there. So the Clintons were very busy selling favors to foreign entities. And then all of a sudden, when Donald Trump actually won, oops, well, crap, that really foiled everybody's plans. That and the fact that they were also counting on Hillary Clinton to win so that all the illegal activity that they were doing at the time wouldn't be investigated and prosecuted. Well, it was investigated, except that they spent time investigating Trump. And so, the old saying, the best defense is a good offense. They were going on the offense to try to cover up their own crimes. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line. But
yeah, well, and the Republicans really wouldn't want to have raised that because I know that they are doing the same thing. I remember there was a big to-do about a congressman named Billy Tozan in, I don't know, I think it was somewhere around 2000, 2001, somewhere around there. Tozan was a Democrat from Louisiana, and there was a bill in Congress on, I think it was the drug benefit program for Medicare. And what this congressman did was that he switched parties so that he could vote for the legislation, and then as soon as the legislation passed, he went to work for a big pharma company for $1 million a year. I mean, it was like a clear, absolute, indisputable case of a payoff of a member of Congress. But after that, following that, there was actually some investigative journalism going on, and they discovered that they reported that there were a lot of members of Congress whose relatives were getting all of these benefits from both government contracts and from, getting jobs and payments through nonprofits. And, it was just like a nest of corruption.
Yeah.
And that all came out, but nothing ever changed. Nobody did anything about it.
Yeah.
So much for the court of public opinion and its usefulness. Exactly. If you don't have law enforcement, if you don't have a Department of Justice, court of public opinion means squat.
Yes. And that's the problem, is there is no everybody that I think in some ways Donald Trump thought he could make a difference and go into public office and clean things up. The reality is, and I'm not saying Donald Trump is a saint, and all of that, I mean, he's got his own problems. There's way too much corporatism in his ranks as well, and in his agenda as well. And he's got this, the sweetheart deals with the bankers and all that other stuff, and the globalist USMCA, all of that stuff. There's a lot of problems Donald Trump has. But I do think there are some things he thought he could do to try to clean things up. And when he gets in, he's literally in over his head. I mean, everyone he can pick, everyone that's available to do certain jobs that he can find, or somebody would recommend that he trusts. The problem is you can't trust anybody when you're in a position like that.
Right. Who
None of them are
provided
trustworthy.
him with his list of candidates for the various jobs?
That's the problem.
The Republican National Committee.
Somebody he thought he could trust.
Yeah. It was Reince Priebus, I think, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have that corrupt system in the background, National Endowment for Democracy, and the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute, and they are international organizations, and their objective is to build the international system. It's Ned that directs the activities for the color revolutions using USAID.
Yep. I want to go on with John Cornyn, because he goes on to talk about how Congress abdicates their role in making legislation clear. And working in a bipartisan way so that the laws will be less likely to be challenged and go to the judiciary.
But I also was struck by the fact that one of the reasons why cases get litigated is because of the failure of the Congress to build consensus for legislation. And to me, the Affordable Care Act is one example of that. When either side pushes through a partisan piece of legislation, it's not realistic to expect that the fight will be over. It'll just move to a different form. It'll move to the courts. That's not what happened on things like Medicare and Social Security. There was built a broad bipartisan consensus. In other words, members of Congress actually did the hard work to find that consensus so that they didn't have to hand it off to the judiciary. And unfortunately, I think we've seen a tendency in recent years to do exactly that, where Congress has abdicated its responsibilities, figuratively, let me say, pull the pin on a hand grenade and then hand it to the judiciary and say, you figure it out. And maybe, just maybe, that's one reason why these judicial confirmation hearings have become so contentious, because people actually see the judiciary as the ultimate policymaker.
You know, when he's talking about that, that reminds me of my time as a union rep. Years ago, several years ago now, I used to be a representative for the UAW at the local news station where I worked. It was WILX in Lansing, Michigan. We had the United Auto Workers Union was there, and for a time I was a representative. I started off being an alternate, and then the guy who was actually doing it, and I thought when I was the alternate that it would never, I'd never be the actual guy until the guy who was the actual rep one day put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Have fun in negotiations. I'm quitting. I'm going across town to the competition." And so I said, "Oh, well, I hadn't had any training or anything." So I was kind of thrown into this, and it was baptismal by fire, really. But it was a very educational experience for a variety of reasons, not the least of which every single decision that you make, knowing full well that you are making decisions not just for yourself, but for everybody who is for the entire station, for the entire unit. And there was just 4 of us, I think, as I recall, making the decision for the contract, where you're going to give ground, where you're going to hold the line. You have certain people who give you feedback, but ultimately, in the end, you have to do something to give them as much of what they want, but still get an agreement. So at times, the decision-making process was excruciating. But one thing that stands out in my mind and why I brought this up is I remember there were times when we could have made the language very, very clear. And I suggested, because when you're in that situation, you also have a rep from the actual union come down to help you negotiate. So they're sitting there, and they're talking with you and advising you where you need advice. And there were times when, and this person, by the way, is also involved in any disputes, when a situation comes up with regard to a grievance later on down the road, this person is the person that deals with that. And that's really the key issue here, because there were areas in the negotiation process where the language could actually been made really, really clear, to avoid a grievance. And I thought that's what our role was, is to make clear language to avoid grievances down the road. That way all sides understand the contract, what it means. But he said to me when I suggested this to him, well, we don't want to nail it down too much. And it puzzled me. I'm like, why? And I got to thinking about it, and I thought, he's ensuring his own job security. He wants, because if he locks down the contracts to the point where there's no dispute, everybody knows what it says, then he's out of work. He doesn't have any grievances to deal with. So
that's a big part of the job that lawyers do. Mm-hmm. It's the only profession that I know of, well, except maybe doctors, where they can create their own future business just by what they do in a current project or current activity. And that's the legislative assistants in Congress. I'm sure they think of that too.
Yeah.
When they're writing their legislation.
We got a call on the line, so we'll
if
go to the phone. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, that's okay. Go ahead.
We got a call on the line. We'll go to the phones after the break. We got the bottom of the hour break. And, folks, you're welcome to jump on board as well. 610-600-1776 is the number. 610-600-1776. Or if you don't have free long distance, it's 844-6-GOVERN. That's 844-646-8376. Got to take a quick time out. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us. This is Govern America.
Go to find out what's really going on. This is Govern America.
Welcome back to the broadcast. This is Govern America. Vicky Davis is here. I'm Darren Weeks. As we continue on here, I want to go ahead and go to the phones, unless you have something you want to say real quick, Vicky?
No, I think I was finished.
Okay, very good. Let's go to New Mexico. I think this is John in New Mexico. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning, Darren. Hi, thank you.
Hi.
It's been a very interesting conversation because you're just driving me up the wall. I've been taking notes and a lot of food for potential thought. You've covered a lot of ground, haven't you, this morning?
Well,
and I just wondered, Vicky, I think it comes back to Vicky. In my mind, it comes back to Vicky's expertise in the technological aspect of behavior in our systems. You know, all of our systems, the political system being the most visible, obviously. My basic thought when Darren, you were talking about the problem with Amy Coney Barrett and your disagreements and your critique of some of her, the memorable events in her career. Well, everybody's open. Once you've opened yourself up to achieving anything, the destructive capacity for remembering or being recorded or, human error is immense nowadays. I was looking at a book called Texture that was written by Richard Harper, and it's human expression in the age of communications overload. Mm-hmm. To be at Microsoft, and he goes into a really good critique about how all of these communication systems, they've got their own problems built within, and it's a psychological effect in terms of what we see and what we hear. Mm-hmm. And obviously, that's the throw off of all of this wonderful technology. And I think a lot of our American experience, just like the world experience, anybody, whether they're in politics or academia or media, they have a certain level of expertise in technology. But the fact is, here in America, we've also been under an attack from these philosophers of the left that have tried to deconstruct everything. Derrida comes to mind. Through psychoanalytics and socially, all of these issues that get into deconstructionism. So we've got this technology opening everything up. Now,
it's making people antisocial. I find a correlation, John, with the technology, which they call social media, ironically, because I think it's a lot of the technology, they talk about social media apps, social media sites, and yet it really is making people less social, less likely to talk in a friendly manner with each other. I mean, there are things that you will say behind a computer keyboard, for instance, or a phone screen to somebody that you'd never say to their face, and so it makes people less social in that regard, but it's also making them socially distant. And I think to me the COVID-19 stuff is a perfect correlation with that, because now you've got them overtly telling people they need to distance each other. You got the mask mayhem, which is causing people to be afraid of each other, and So to me, I don't know about you, but I find this whole thing to be a big part of a huge conditioning process. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, I make this point to you that this process that you're talking about, they used to call atomization due to technology and in the workplace, in the early industrial. They've been writing about this for 200 years, thinkers, and primarily out of Europe. We've known the social and psychological effects of the technology for years. So it's in science. It's in behavioral science. They know this stuff happens, and that's why they've let us. Our leaders have let us down in this COVID thing.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
really,
and I wonder, did they do it intentionally, or is it that they don't know and don't understand either? In all the systems that I've analyzed,
the psychological
I kept...
No.
Hold on, you're talking over Vicky. Go ahead, Vicky.
Oh, I wondered as I looked at it, did they really understand what it was that they were doing? Because I know that consulting firms and computer firms and so forth, they have tremendous marketers. They can paint you a picture that is so beautiful, but there is a dark side that they never understand. And Millie Weaver just released her second documentary on Shadowgate 2.0, and they do a really good job of explaining the dark side, which is the compilation of all the information about you as an individual, me and Darren, and how that information can be used against us. And I seriously doubt that most of the members of Congress really understood it.
Yeah. Go ahead, caller.
Oh, I understand that first one. They didn't the tech people try and censor Shadowland, the first Shadowland?
Shadowgate.
Is it available online? Is that?
I believe it still is. They tried to censor it, and I'm not saying that every jot and tittle of that their documentary is. There's some things about that whole situation I won't get into right now, but all I can say is everything that can be documented, people should do their own research. There's some of it that can be backed up, but just do your research when you. And we should all do this anyway with regard to everything, including what I say, because I could be wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
Try not to be. But.
Well, I guess I know that they were compiling information profiles. I call it a profile. They call it a shadow because a shadow is kind of a symbolic representation. So if, there is you and then there is your shadow. And so they use the term shadow as a symbolic representation of you as a replacement for a file. They're actually keeping a file on you and all of your proclivities, your everything you do. And it's not just social media, by the way. It's everything. It's your medical record. It's your divorce and marriage history. It's your credit history. All of that information they can get on you, so that they know more about you than you know about yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And that information can be used against you, or it can be used in a proactive way to set you up in some way.
There you go. Go ahead. Final thought there, John?
Well, that's tyranny. That's tyranny. The shadow comes out of Jungian psychology. He talked about the shadow in people's personality. I want to make one more point. And
okay.
Thank you very much for this enlightenment. When the Congress, when the founders founded our country and divided the powers the way that they did, it was about a body of personalities. It wasn't about technology. It was about, the media was reporting on what they were doing and who they were in their background, what their, and America was kind of a wide open, kind of an experimental aspect to growing the republic. And when they chose the republic, which they didn't choose a dark, a shadow government. They weren't trying to set that up, but they had the understanding that we were a republic, so that there would be certain laws. We would subject ourselves to certain laws based on informed, not democracy, but republics being ruled by the best and democracies being ruled by the mob. So with that, I thank you very much.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the call. I don't know why that buzz is.
Thank you.
I don't know why that buzz is taking place there. Hopefully that's not on the maybe something I have to chase down later. Anyway, but we will take calls if anybody wants to call in, 610-600-1776 or toll free 844-646-8376. Anyway, getting back to Cornyn real quick, I had one more soundbite from him, and he talks about the court making law from the bench and upending the legislative process.
There are various rules of the road, so to speak, for how the judiciary approaches cases, right?
Correct.
In other words, perhaps the most fundamental difference is that rather than making broad policy pronouncements, you decide cases, correct?
That is correct.
And in fact, I'm struck by a New York University Law Review article by Justice Ginsburg in, I forgot what year it is, but where she talks about Roe versus Wade. And she talks about what she called the breathtaking decision versus the court's more cautious dispositions. She said, suppose the court had stopped after rightly declaring unconstitutional a portion of the law and had not gone on, as it did in Roe, to fashion a regime blanketing the subject, a set of rules that displaced virtually every state law that enforced. Would there have been a 20-year controversy we have witnessed, reflected most recently in the Supreme Court's splinter decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey? Might it have served to reduce rather than to fuel controversy? Well, I think what she's saying is when the courts step in and basically take over by stating a constitutional rule, it really prevents the very people who are elected by voters from making policy.
Yeah. So there's the term that you coined earlier, outcomes-based jurisprudence. I think it's fascinating to see this, because the balance of powers, the separation of powers, is something that was supposed to have been a stabilizing factor in our constitutional republic, and yet when you have legislative bodies skirting their role, and in fact passing off, we talked earlier, Vicky, in previous broadcasts about some of the things Congress was doing to push power off to the president, making him king. At the same time, really taking away, to the office of the president, giving power to the office of the president, but actually gutting the president's actual power of really unilaterally making decisions. So, in other words, basically the people around him.
I'm not sure how you arrive at that the president's power has been gutted. there's been concern for the last 20 years.
William Barr would be a good example of that.
Congress has transferred so much power to the executive branch, and the executive branch, George W. Bush, Obama, and now
but you're talking about the executive branch. The executive branch.
Taken so much power.
Yes, executive branch.
Pushing the limits of executive power.
Well, let me answer your question, because you're. What I'm talking about is the executive branch has gotten the power, but the president himself, who is the chief of the executive branch, still has people around him that are making these decisions and quote-unquote advising him, but they're actually sabotaging him. So if he can be fed information by the intelligence establishment, let's just use the CIA as an example, then does he really hold the power when he can be undermined by his attorney general? Does he really hold the power? So at the same time, what appears to be going on to me is while they're giving the executive branch near dictatorial powers, at the same time they're keeping the man who commands that office, that commands that branch, the inability to properly make decisions. There's talk right now. We talked about this on previous.
That's a very, very good point, Darren.
My point, what I'm getting at, Vicky, is this is an empowerment of the deep state. And what are we talking about when we talk about the deep state? We're talking about the permanent state. The people, the administrative people that orbit around the president, the administrative people that orbit around the legislators, these are people that are there all the time. It doesn't matter what administration, what party, what letter they have after their name, who they're associated with. They're there. They are the facade for the cameras, for the people to debate over, to argue over. But at the end of the day, I hate using that phrase, but when it's all over, does it really matter who we elect if we have people in the shadows that are actually doing the decision making, that are actually making the choices and manipulating the situation to get the outcome that the men in the shadows that you never really know the names of, but you have a pretty good idea that they have a lot of money, that the Davos crowd, the George Soros crowd, the billionaires, the Bill Gates types, the people that are really fomenting public policy, and we got to say the Rockefellers and Rothschilds and whatever else. I mean, these are the people that are pushing public policy. And we have a lot of corporate influence and all that as well. But the people that we elect, they're subjugated to this.
Well, yeah, and you made a really good point. The senior executive service, they are there as permanent employees that can't be fired. And they're the ones that keep the programs going along on track. And the ACA is such a big issue because the Republicans want it repealed, totally gone, and it is a signature piece of legislation for the Democrats. And when a new president comes in, I mean, let's face it, we have a huge government. It's very complex. You have to have people who understand what's going on and so forth. And you can't just come in with a machete and start axing things.
I don't
because
it
doesn't just hurt the people in Washington, D.C. that lose their jobs. It hurts a lot of people throughout the states and ordinary people like us.
What I hear Trump saying is not that he wants to gut it. He wants to repeal Obamacare so that they could put in place something else. And I don't know if that... Frankly, I don't think that's going to happen. I'd be very surprised if it did. But I don't think they're going to repeal it, to be honest with you. Now, they did get rid of the individual mandate, which I thought was the most oppressive thing about the whole thing. Because why should people be forced to pay for a basically under potential criminal penalty of the IRS. Now, one of the things that I understand from doing reading years ago, I was talking about how they had the House version of the bill and the Senate version of the bill. The Senate version of the bill would have made it to the point where the IRS could literally prosecute you. The House version of the bill. The bill that they didn't pass, in other words, made it to the point where literally you could be prosecuted by the IRS because it was considered an IRS tax. You could be prosecuted for not having health insurance, basically. And now they made it to where that individual mandate is gone. The version that they passed, I think there was a penalty, but it wasn't criminal prosecution, as I recall. Because that was the big thing at the time, if you recall. I mean, literally, when Nancy Levant and I were hosting together, we were talking about that a lot. It's frightening to think that if you can't afford the health care, if you can't afford to pay for it, that they're going to turn around and come after you.
Yeah, that was really bad.
Egregious.
But they needed to have that in order to make their managed care model work.
Which means they're
managed competition. It's not managed care.
But that's not freedom.
Managed competition.
That's not freedom. When you're forcing people.
The Democrats don't care about your freedom. Freedom was not an issue.
Well, and unfortunately, neither do the Republicans. Although this was, and to be honest with you, as I recall, this was originally one of those things that was initially started on the Republican side of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, they can't just walk in and repeal something because everything is interrelated. The caller talked about technology and the effect of technology on our government. Well, he is so right. Because when you have all the systems of government that have been designed, they all have a basis in law. They all are justified in law somewhere. And what they've done is integrate those systems. So you basically have kind of like a Gordian knot or a rat's nest of legislation and systems that you can't just say, we're going to get rid of this whole thing. Just cut it right out. Like you do a cancerous limb or something. You can't do that. It has to be unraveled and disentangled, so that you don't do more harm than you're doing good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think they care about that anymore, to be perfectly honest with you. A little follow-up on the, turning a corner here in the interest of time, a little follow-up on the Section 230 stuff that we were talking about before, previous broadcasts. Section 230, for those that don't recall, is the portion of the law which protects websites, social, here we go with the term again, but it doesn't just protect social media companies. We talk, like Facebook and Twitter. We talk a lot about these big companies like Facebook and Twitter because they're the ones that are so prominent and YouTube would come into play here as well. They're the ones that are so prominent at the censorship that's the mass censorship that's going on in a major way. And by the way, they've taken the mask off, Vicky. They're making it to the point where they're not even trying to pretend. They're they're actively interfering with an election. Now we've heard nothing but talk about how the Russians are interfering with everything, and the Russians are doing this, and the Russians are doing that. And yet we have blatantly before our eyes big tech companies that are massively trying to tip the scale in a federal election. And what can be done about that? Well, I think there's a lot of things that can be done about it. Unfortunately, I don't know why Trump is doing this, but he has been tweeting out, repeal Section 230. repeal Section 230. And this is a wrong-headed move. We don't want Section 230 repealed. Maybe it could be changed in such a way that it could be enforced differently. Maybe the language could be strengthened in some way.
Why don't we want Section 230 repealed?
Because Section 230 protects websites, including yours and mine, from being criminally liable in the case that somebody posts a comment on our website. So that, Gab would not be able to exist. Gab is a free speech platform. Gab is completely free speech. Not too long ago, you had a guy go on to Gab. He's one of these mass shooters. He was accused of being that. He went in and said, "Screw your optics, I'm going in." He posted that on Gab. Okay? And then he went and committed this thing, allegedly. I think he was found guilty. I don't know where that trial stands. The point is that there was this big uproar against Gab. Now, Gab cooperated with the police when they conducted their investigation, and Gab says, "Look, we don't have anything to do with this. This is what he posted on our site. We have no control over that." If it weren't for Section 230, Gab would be. So Section 230 provides a buffer from a website owner, somebody who owns a website, from being responsible for the content on the website when somebody else, a third party, posts it on there. I'll tell you, we're at the top of the hour. Let's continue this discussion because I think it's an important one. I don't know who's advising Trump, but what we're talking about is his solution, if it's implemented, will have a huge detrimental effect on free speech on the internet.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
New world order.
New world order.
This is a moment to seize. The kaleidoscope has been shaken. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
A new world order.
A world where the United Nations is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Nevertheless, the United States is in a key position to shape this so that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
The first decade of the 21st century, that out of what will be seen as the greatest restructuring of the global economy, a new world order was created.
Documenting the crisis of our republic.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waging war on the New World Order.
The councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
This is Govern America with Darren Weeks and Vicky Davis.
Live from FEMA Regions 5 and 10, this is the third and final hour of Govern America, and what's turned out to be an interesting show. It's funny how these things always take a life of their own. They don't ever go the way you plan them, it seems like, but that's great. That's the way we like it. GovernAmerica.com is the website, GovernAmerica.com. Check out Vicky's research and information on her websites, TheTechnocraticTyranny.com and ChannelingReality.com. And anyway, we're talking about Section 230 just before the top of the hour break hit. And what it is, and basically, Section 230 says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. it provides a blanket immunity for the owner of a website or platform or service that's interactive, that, like most of our websites, like mine, yours, you can post comments on there. People can go and publish comments on there and have and do, and it keeps the owner of the website. If you got a small outfit, you could probably police the comments and decide whether or not to post them or not. But if you get a website of any size, it'll get to the point where, you're spending all your time trying to vet whether or not a comment is worthy of being posted. And when you get even a small social media site, there are instances, like, for instance, Mastodon. There's something called Mastodon. And you can go and you can download the software, and you can set up your own social media outfit. I've thought about doing it, actually, because I'm being left out of a lot of family events because I don't have an active Facebook account. And I thought maybe this could be a way of drawing my family members away from Facebook to get them to post over there. Only problem is, the matter of funding, and as the thing grows, it would take up more and more space. And do I want to have to deal with having to fund all that if other family members aren't willing to kick in and, whatever. But anyway, the point is that I could be in this situation. Any of us could be in this situation. Now, the big guys like Facebook and Twitter, they've got paid attorneys that they could actually use and get themselves out of it. So if they get a lot of lawsuits, they're better equipped to be able to deal with that. Somebody like you or me, if we were to set up a site where it would grow, and the primary nature of the site would be people posting comments, then if somebody gets a wild hair up their hind end and decides to post something that is could get you in legal trouble, it wouldn't even have to be a threat, although that would be included. You would be liable as if you posted it yourself because it's on your website. Section 230 makes a distinction that, very much the same way the phone companies aren't responsible for you getting on the phone and engaging in a conversation that would be illegal. It makes it to the point where the website is not a publisher. The website is actually just a platform through which conversation is facilitated. And okay. The difficulty here is that, and I understand why people are upset and how to deal with social media. I think that but the problem under the law, Facebook and Twitter are enjoying the legal protection of Section 230, but so is everybody else. So the problem isn't so much Section 230 as it's their ability to basically play both sides. In other words, if they are going to maintain that they have protection under Section 230, then they need to take a hands-off approach and not be censoring content. That's the issue here. It isn't Section 230 itself, it's their ability to be both a publisher and, in other words, exerting editorial control over the content, while at the same time claiming to be exempt from liability under Section 230. That's the issue. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, the Section 230 is in the Telecommunications Act of 1934. That's when it was passed. So the issues of today are far different. What the title of it is the Communications Decency Act, and it says in here, the Cornell, I'm just reading a part of it, it said it was never intended to provide legal protection to websites that unlawfully promote and facilitate prostitution and websites that facilitate traffickers in advertising the sale of unlawful sex acts with sex trafficking victims. Okay, so So when you talk about Section 230, they are talking about the Decency Act, but it's really the protection. And I don't think websites like yours and mine, we're not the issue. We don't even count in this thing. The issue is in the big platforms, Facebook and Twitter and whatever other big ones that are out there where a lot of people go. And we don't just have one problem, which is that people can post whatever they want, and the platforms are not liable for that content. We have the problem of those platforms actually censoring people based on political ideology.
I agree.
Section 230
I disagree slightly.
Is obsolete.
Okay.
Section 230.
It may not be. It does apply, but it may be obsolete in the sense that it's outdated. I'll give you that, and perhaps the language does need to be updated to make it more consistent with modern times. The problem is, and I know there's a lot of people that have these conversations, because I know the libertarians, the people who are completely free market type of people, and you'd probably include many of the anarchists in this as well, would say, well, it's not the government's job to be, talking about what a private company like Facebook or Twitter can do with their own website. I would disagree with that, because they are so big, they can influence public discourse one way or the other. And I would bring up the fact that the phone companies are private companies, and yet they don't regulate what you can say or what you can and can't say on the phone. So there is that. But the problem here that I see is that if you remove Section 230, or the portion of Section 230, which deals with protecting companies or individuals, for that matter, any provider of an interactive computer service. So I could set up a Mastodon instance and have people come on and join Mastodon, and they are chatting away and sharing family photos or whatever else. And somebody says something that's libelous or slanderous or otherwise would get me into legal issues, I would have no protection. They could pursue me. So I would disagree with you in the sense that it doesn't matter to us. I think it does matter to us, because any of us who have an interactive website, it matters to you. It is a protection that you can fall back on. Now, I'm perfectly open with the idea that it can be updated to make it clearer for the modern times. Perhaps that does need to happen. But something does need to be done.
And perhaps they could put a qualifier in it that, depending on the volume and the people that are, the number of people that are on your website. Say, I'm not worried about liability in those terms, because if I saw a comment that was libeling somebody, I would just delete it and probably boot the person who posted it. But I can do that because I have low volume on my website.
Here's what.
But a company like Facebook,
right? But even
that's
if
something entirely different.
Even if
they're just in a different ball game entirely.
If you launched a website,
and so I don't think we can make judgments based on our own personal situation, because you are not the same as Facebook.
It doesn't matter. The point is that...
Well, yes, it does. It certainly does.
Well, I don't agree with you on that, though, because the problem is that if I launched a website whose very nature was interactivity, I'm not going to be able to constantly police every single comment that goes up on the thing.
Well, then don't launch one.
Well, that's killing free speech, Vicky.
If you can't manage it responsibly, you shouldn't have one.
I don't agree, because this is how you have alternatives to the big tech censorship, is by launching your own thing. But
you said you wanted one for your family to be able to post things and stuff.
Well, family,
so your intent is not really to open it up as a public platform
for
everybody in the world to post.
you certainly have people in your family, or you have, every family has people in there that might do things that are wrong. And you might have normally stable people in your family that go a little nuts sometimes.
I go a little nuts sometimes.
The point is that your solution.
I don't libel people. Like, I was on a website one time where comments were being made, and this woman did a video on John Podesta, I think it was, accusing him of being a pedophile. Mm-hmm. And it was, I took offense, not because of John Podesta, but the idea that somebody could just post something where they have no proof whatsoever, no proof at all. And I was thinking about all the ordinary guys out there, where a girlfriend might get mad, or ex-girlfriend or whatever, and do a video accusing an ordinary guy of being a pedophile with no proof.
Yeah.
And so I read her the riot act for posting it. But
yeah, and I've got people that
these are complex issues. I don't think it can be reduced to a simplistic all or nothing.
Well, I'm not trying to reduce it to simplicity. I think, to me, it's not that complicated, really. The Section 230 is being used. Well, let me just share with you what Gab says about it. Because Gab is a social media platform. They're not that big, although they have been growing as censorship continues to grow among the other huge platforms. A lot of people are looking at Gab as a place to go because they have no other alternative. Their accounts are being frozen, banned, or whatever else. But they wrote a piece on their blog. The repeal of Section 230 narrative is being pushed by Silicon Valley. Don't fall for it. They say the big tech giants want to be regulated. Yes, you read that right. Big tech knows that if online speech is regulated by the federal government, either directly or indirectly via regulation of tech companies, they can and will weaponize it against the people and stifle competition. Big tech...
They're already doing it, though. They're already doing it.
Yes, they are already doing it, but Section 230 will basically put a nail in the coffin. Big tech oligarchs, they continue, have tried everything to destroy Gab.com and stop our industry-leading free speech software from reaching the masses. They banned us from both app stores, yet we continue to grow. They banned us from hosting providers, so we built our own. Then they banned us from PayPal, Stripe, Coinbase, Square, and more. So we educated our community on free speech money, and the great people of Gab started mailing us physical checks to keep the site online. Then they blacklisted, he says they blacklisted my family, and this is Torba, the guy that, Andrew Torba, who wrote, he's the CEO, he's this guy that started this thing. He says, then they blacklisted my family from Visa. The card? In a communist Chinese party social credit score style form of tyranny. He says, despite being banned by 25-plus service providers, including domain registrars, hosting platforms, app stores, email services, e-commerce services, and more, Gab has survived and continues to thrive. Gab exists outside of the establishment's control. They don't like this at all. Their monopoly on free flow of information is coming to an end because Gab is inevitable. When all else failed, big tech and the establishment have set their sights on using big government to crush Gab and other alternative technology startups by destroying Section 230 and lobbying for regulation of speech on the Internet. Regulation.
Well, what you're describing is restraint of trade, which really is falls under a different category, and I don't know if they ever decided that the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, had a role in Internet commerce or not. I know it was an issue. Mm-hmm. But see, what the big platforms are doing in that case is exercising monopoly power to prevent a smaller business from getting going. But that's a different issue than the free speech issue.
I don't think it's a different issue because who's pushing Section 230 repeal? It is these big tech companies that are.
Well,
that
you
are
say that, but I'm not entirely convinced of that.
Well, he says, what folks need to understand is that Section 230 does not protect the speech of big tech companies. When big tech fact checks users' content, they are acting as a publisher, and Section 230 immunity does not apply. As such, they can be held accountable for that speech. Section 230 doesn't apply to big tech's editorializing. The First Amendment does. Section 230 only applies to content that users post on their platforms. It provides no protection for big tech's own speech. They can and should be punished for the false information they are giving to the public by weaponizing this editorialization of user content. In the case of the coronavirus, big tech has been using the WHO as the authority, quote unquote, on health-related matters instead of official health guidelines from the President of the United States. This is a matter of national security and public health. The same goes for editorializing election-related content. By fact-checking one candidate and not another, big tech is giving in an in-kind campaign contribution of enormous and immeasurable monetary value to the Biden campaign. Big tech should be investigated by the FEC for these in-kind campaign contributions to the Biden campaign. The RNC has filed a report on it, so let's hope the FEC takes action. I wouldn't hold my breath. Big tech has had record stock market performances under the Trump administration, and how are they repaying him? By helping the Democrats spread the Russian hoax narrative, by quote-unquote fact-checking him and not Joe Biden, by censoring links to news stories about Biden. The president can and should trust bust the big tech monopolies, in particular Apple and Google's duopoly on mobile app distribution, along with Facebook and Google's duopoly on online advertising and search. The only big reason that he hasn't is because big tech stocks make up a significant portion of the stock market growth he likes to tout. If the market needs to take a hit in order to destroy a domestic threat to freedom and the flow of information online, then so be it. We do not worship the stock market in America. We worship Almighty God. Your 401k gains aren't worth the future of the Republic. Sorry. He says, my point is, don't fall for the Section 230 narrative. It's a distraction. There are plenty of other things that can be done to stop big tech tyranny. The president vastly underestimates how much influence he has online. Antitrust, FEC investigations, and more aside, if the president were to promote free speech technology platforms like Gab, the big tech panopticon would collapse on itself and fast. I just hope the president realizes this before it's too late. I fear his time on big tech platforms is quickly running out. Anyway, I just thought I'd put that in line for people's consideration. And later on, earlier prior to that, he wrote an open letter to President Trump on the subject of 230. I think.
Well, let me tell you what Congress is doing. There was a hearing held last week on Thursday, and the person chairing the committee is Adam Schiff. And what they were talking about in this hearing is social media censorship. And the central idea that they're pushing for, that Schiff seems to be pushing for, is a ministry of truth.
Yeah.
So it's a complex issue. I mean, no matter how simple you'd like to make it, or anybody would like to make it, we've just, in this few minutes, we've talked about the FCC, the FTC, the FEC, and there are probably other acronym agencies of government involved. So it is a highly complex issue that has to be dealt with in some way.
I agree.
And you're right, I don't want a ministry of truth. I don't want Facebook to be able to censor what I write based on their political views.
Mm-hmm.
We can't have that because we see what they're doing with that power.
Yes, we have.
censoring conservative ideology.
We are in absolute agreement.
It's a big mess. It's a gigantic mess.
Yeah, we're in absolute agreement. The only thing is, I would say, is that Section 230 would help them create the Ministry of Truth, because it would cut out anybody else from being able to have an alternative to the disinformation-controlled networks and platforms of the establishment. And that's I think where we differed a little bit. And anyway, so that's our goals are the same, and I think we do agree on in principle.
Yeah, well, I do think though we have to differentiate between your website, my website as individuals, and the big commercial websites where they have millions of people on them.
But at the same time,
I don't think we can be treated in the same way.
As I said, though, anybody can start a social media website. Anybody.
Well, and when they build up to a commercial status, then they become regulated. It's pretty hard to do that.
Well,
it's pretty hard.
I don't know that you can. I don't think you can regulate them differently
and get millions of people on it.
That would be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. I don't think you can do that.
Well, it not really. I mean, when you reach a commercial status, we're not equal with corporations.
Yeah, but that's I don't like it, but the corporations are people now, Vicky.
Well, I know they are, and that's one of the biggest problems in our country, is that there was a decision in the 1800s. And there was supposed to be some dirty dealing there. If there's one thing that the Supreme Court should fix, it's that decision. Corporations, commercial entities are not people. They don't have, as far as I'm concerned, they don't have rights like people.
They're
Only
psychopaths.
people have rights.
Corporations, by their very natures, are psychopaths, especially if they're public corporations. The only thing they care about is making a profit.
That's right.
Many of them, and I guess it's mostly the public ones, because there are some people who run corporations that care, and obviously corporations have to be profitable or at least break even, or they're no longer going to be there. But public corporations especially, and even wholly owned ones, if they get big enough, they turn into psychopathic operations. And they do damage to the public and people at large. They don't care unless they're forced to care.
Well, they're only considered people in terms of decisions that are beneficial to them.
Yeah.
If they considered corporations as people, and there were criminal penalties for the criminal acts of corporations, where you charge the entire board of directors and all the key men in a corporation for the bad decisions of the corporation, then, okay, you can be a person. And we'll hang you all.
Anyway, moving along here. The big news of this week, by the way, which we amazingly haven't even got to, is this New York Post reveal. We've kind of referenced it about Joe Biden, which the article, the first one I think that came out was October 14th. Which is just 3 days ago. Smoking gun email reveals how Hunter Biden introduced Ukrainian businessman to Vice President Dad. And really, this is really germane to what we're already talking about here with regard to the internet censorship, because it was this link to the article when people would post it on Twitter, their accounts were being locked. I mean, when it's that blatant, under the guise that they're violating Twitter rules, and to be honest with you, I've been very active on Twitter. I've abandoned Facebook for the most part, and I've been very active on Twitter because Twitter had been the better of the two platforms. As far as censorship, Twitter wasn't doing that for a long time. It was only right around, I think, 2016 when this whole thing started happening. And there was a coordinated effort between all of the platforms to ban to deplatform Alex Jones. I believe that's when they finally decided, we're going to take the mask off and we're just going to be very, very obvious. We don't care anymore. We got to shut this thing down. That shows you, Vicky, that they are running scared. The globalists, the control freaks, the people who are really trying to lock everything down, when they're so blatant that they just do this and they don't even care anymore, it's just remarkable. Shows how effective our side has been at using the internet against them. We got the bottom of the hour break. Let's go ahead and take that, and we'll continue. Stay with us, folks. We'll be back.
Where the spooks go to find out what's really going on. This is Governor.
I have never discussed with my son or my brother or anyone else anything having to do with their businesses, period. I did anything wrong, and I didn't realize he was on the board till after he'd been on the board, and at the same time, he has come forward and said it was a mistake on his part to be on the board. I don't know what he was doing. I know he was on the board. I found out he was on the board after he was on the board. And that was it. The fact is, I was unaware of his investments until it occurred, and I've never discussed what my son's business with him because I didn't want any conflict. I don't discuss business with my son. I didn't know that was the case. I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings. I've never discussed my business or their business, my sons or daughters, and I've never discussed them.
He's completely ignorant. He doesn't know anything. Joe Biden doesn't. Welcome back to the broadcast, final half hour here, as Vicky Davis and I, Darren Weeks, are here. Every Saturday, we hope you'll tell somebody about the broadcast, talking about Hunter Biden's corruption, but we could be talking about a lot of people in government, because this pay-for-play thing, I think, is incredibly common, and most of it, unfortunately, doesn't come out into public. New York Post broke an article on the 14th. Hunter Biden introduces his father, then Vice President Joe Biden, to a top executive at a Ukrainian energy firm less than a year before the elder Biden pressured government officials in Ukraine into firing a prosecutor who was investigating the company, according to emails obtained by the Post. Now, we have played the audio from that over and over again. Actually, I'll just go ahead. This is Joe Biden in front of the Council on Foreign Relations talking about how he got a Ukrainian prosecutor fired from his job using public funds, using foreign aid, holding that hostage under condition that they changed their public policy.
It just happened to be that was the assignment I got. I got all the good ones. So I got Ukraine. And I remember going over convincing our team, or others, to convincing us that we should be providing for loan guarantees. And I went over, I guess, the 12th, 13th time to Kyiv, and I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. So they said they were walking out to press conference. I said, no, I said, I'm not going to, or we're not going to give you the $1 billion. They said, you have no authority. You're not the president. The president said. I said, call him. I said, I'm telling you, you're not getting the $1 billion. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Well, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid at the time.
Someone who was solid. Someone who wasn't going to look into Hunter Biden. That's what he's talking about here. Mm-hmm. So this, the crooked dealings, and frankly, this is not even up for debate. The corruption that's involved here is extensive, and it's not anything that can't be proven. And because, that right there is enough. He's telling you right there. He's not hiding anything. He's bragging about it, how he got this guy fired. There's a lot of information that's come out, including stuff with regard to Hunter Biden, the Bidens, and communist China. There was an equal article the first day was the one about Ukraine. The second day was, and this was on the 15th, emails reveal how Hunter Biden tried to cash in big on behalf of family with Chinese firm. They say Hunter Biden pursued lucrative deals involving China's largest private energy company, including one that he said would be interesting for me and my family, unquote. Emails obtained by the Post show. One email sent to Biden on May 13, 2017, with the subject line, expectations, included details of remuneration packages for 6 people involved in an unspecified business venture. Biden was identified as, quote, chair/vice chair, depending on agreement with CEFC, unquote, an apparent reference to the former Shanghai-based conglomerate CEFC China Energy Company. His pay was pegged at $850. And the email also noted that Hunter has some office expectations he will elaborate. In addition, the email outlined a provisional agreement under which 80% of the equity or shares in the new company would be split equally among 4 people whose initials correspond to the sender and 3 recipients, with H apparently referring to Biden. The deal also listed 10 Jim and 10 held by H for the big guy. And the question, of course, who is the big guy? I think they're talking about Joe Biden. The money was going to Joe Biden. That's what I think. We talked before, Vicky, on the show about how these politicians, since the regulations are that their wives can't, do this kind of thing, that they get other family members to launder the money for them. And I think this is an example of that happening. What do you think?
I'm absolutely positive of it. But the thing is, though, that, number one, why are we giving aid to Ukraine? What is it that generated the opportunity for this corruption? And, I have no doubt that there are other members of Congress that are involved in similar corruption in other countries. Africa, Ireland, Europe, Germany, Japan, Australia.
Yeah.
This is a global system that they've set up for a global economy. And in trying to set up a global economy, I mean, what can you do in a country if you don't have an economy? Or if you don't have control over the businesses that do business in your country? Mm-hmm. If you just open your borders and let foreign companies come in, what do? They buy up all your water.
All the property.
They buy up your oil. They buy up your electric grid. And I picked those for a reason, because that's what happened. We had foreign companies coming in.
Well, not only that, but they buy up your real estate.
What did they do to allow that to happen, to where you can have foreign businessmen coming into this country to buy up our infrastructure and resources, and American businessmen can go to Ukraine and buy up their resources and infrastructure, and you can invite a country like China to come in and do the same thing. I mean, I'd bet this is a triangulation thing. Mm-hmm. What did China get out of it? Did they get out of it that they could bring their Confucius schools to the United States?
Well, all I know, once again, that's a good question. And I think we have a lot of hints.
I have the answer to it, actually. I have a memo from the State Department on January 19th, 2011. The U.S. and China launched public-private partnership on health care. Mm-hmm. And the idea was for professional exchanges. I assume to bring Chinese doctors here and to send American doctors over there. Okay, now this partnership had companies that were participating in it, and the names of the companies are 3M, Abbott, Chindex, Cisco, General Electric, IBM, Intel, Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Microsoft, Motorola, and Pfizer. The supporting organizations were AdvaMed, which I don't know what that is, the Alliance for Healthcare Competitiveness, the American Chamber of Commerce in China, the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, Pharma, and the U.S.-China Business Council.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our government signed an agreement for this kind of exchange. So was this part of the deal?
I think it's part of it. I don't know that it's all of it.
Yeah, if Biden got a positive decision on this, then Biden's son got that.
Yes, tit
See,
for tat.
In the global economy, the way this all works, triangulation is a very simple thing. Triangulation and setting up small business front companies to launder money, putting influential people on boards of directors. It's just totally the international arena is like the Wild West in terms of what these big corporations can do.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that what they've done to our economy is basically gut our economy.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. The interesting
the Joe Biden is a problem, but he is the result of the problem and not the source of the problem.
Well, I think he's. I mean, look, he was a senator for how many years, how many decades? If he's not the source of the problem, I don't know who is. All these lawmakers.
He couldn't have done it all on his own.
Well, no, I agree.
I agree.
But he certainly is the problem.
Because the Senate ratifies treaties, and the Senate sold us out. Actually, both the Senate and the House with these trade agreements.
Absolutely.
Because they were never about trade. They were about breaking the nation-state system.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as far as who's the problem, Congress are the ones that make the decision on whether or not these trade agreements that you're talking about, all this policy. Ultimately, the buck stops there, because the president can't do anything if Congress doesn't have the bill. And so as far as the administrative state, all of that could be controlled by the Congress. So I put it right on all of these.
By their legislative assistants that are chosen by the Republican Party that is involved in NED, National Endowment for Democracy.
Same thing with the debates,
Yeah.
Controlling the debates.
And what they want to build is a global democratic system, a world democracy movement.
Yep.
That's what, and I think it's Madeleine Albright she's involved with the Community of Democracies. But there are a number of these international democracy groups. And the idea, it all goes back to the design of the Internet. The idea is to have a global democratic system, democracy system, I shouldn't say democratic, democracy system, so that the people in all the world can participate in all the decisions. I mean, it's just freaking insane.
Well, that is democratic in the sense that the problem is that, again, we don't want democratic systems. We might want a system that's somewhat democratic in the sense that people get to vote, but the problem is that you don't want, very much the way community policing, or better said, communitarian policing, sucks in the worst kinds of people, the ones that probably need to be policed, the gang members, the thugs, puts them in, it basically empowers them into a position where they have the ability to set policy now. They're in positions of essential authority, and puts the worst element in charge. So does democracy put the mob in charge of making policy, many of whom don't know anything about it and probably don't care in many regards.
Well, that's where the court of public opinion comes in, and manipulation of perception by the media.
Mm-hmm.
Propaganda.
Yeah, propaganda indeed. And not only propaganda by the media, but also propaganda by public officials who constantly refer to our constitutional republic as a democracy. And that's
not a mistake.
No, I don't think it is either.
This whole movement towards international governing.
Yes. I think you're 100% right on that. Here's Savannah Guthrie, who, by the way, we didn't even talk about the town halls. It was kind of interesting. They had competing town halls, both of them going on at the same time. Biden had his on, I think it was ABC, and Trump had his on NBC. They're claiming that Biden's ratings were much, much higher than Trump's. I don't know if that's true, or if it is, I don't know what it means. You know, it's just that is the case. But Trump went into a very hostile situation, and I thought he did very well at fending off Guthrie's attacks. You know, it was interesting. She came across, she repeatedly interrupted him, but she came across as, basically it was him debating her for the most part.
I heard a bit of it, and that's what it sounded to me like, that he was debating her.
Yeah.
Who is she?
She's supposed to be a nonpartisan journalist. Yeah, I would have clipped some of it, but you know, people can probably, I don't know if you can find it on the internet or not. I have it, but I can't post it because of copyright issues. But the point is that there's a lot of people that, well, I'll just leave that there. I mean, we know what the media is all about. But here Biden, or here Guthrie, much further prior to that, she's confronting Biden on some of this, and you know, he gets kind of testy toward the end.
Has it occurred to you that there's a certain irony here, that here the president is accused of and has acknowledged wanting to get information about your son Hunter and his dealings with Ukraine, and this process of impeachment has ensured that everyone knows about Hunter's dealings with Ukraine?
That's a good thing, and no one's found anything wrong with his dealings with Ukraine, except they say it sets a bad image.
Okay, now let me stop it right there. At the time that this interview happened was during the impeachment, so this was long before these latest articles came out, and you know, they're trying the people on the left who are trying to defend Biden are saying, well, it's not credible. It's not, you know, I guess the Post made it up, kind of thing. But I think the Post would have probably, well, Steve Bannon addressed that later on. Maybe we'll get to his audio. I don't know if we have time.
Well, do you agree that it sets a bad image?
And my son said that.
Do you think it was wrong for him to take that position?
No.
Knowing that it was really because that company wanted access to you.
Well, that's not true. You're saying things you do not know what you're talking about. No one said that. Who said that?
Don't you think that it's just one of those things where people think, well, that seems kind of sleazy. Why would he have that job if not for who his father was?
Because he's a very bright guy.
I guess the question I'm kind of asking is, was it right?
His appearance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he said he regretted having done it. Speaks for himself. He's a grown man.
You going to predict a win tomorrow night?
Okay, so and then they go on to talk. So I think she let him, you know, she had him there. She should have kept pushing. But he was getting very, very testy, and, you know, I mean, ultimately they're on the same side. But
Had Rudy Giuliani released that information at that point?
No. Well, that was before this information
so
came out.
So it reveals Biden to be just an absolute liar,
Absolutely.
Which we already knew. I mean,
yeah, we already knew.
Throughout Biden's entire career, he's been caught lying over and over and over.
Yeah.
So it's no surprise Joe Biden's a liar.
There's going to be more of this information trickled, because this information came from a hard drive, and it was just one hard drive, I guess, that was, I guess Hunter Biden took it to the computer store to get it worked on due to flood damage or something. the guy that runs the computer store himself is seeing impaired. I don't think he's completely blind, but he's seeing impaired. He says he couldn't absolutely guarantee that it was Hunter Biden, but there was something that was referenced his foundation or something. And in fact, on the hard drive itself has scenes or imagery, not only of Hunter Biden, but there's also videos and stuff of him having sex, and there's pictures which have been published online. In fact, this is some of the stuff that the anti-social media companies were censoring. Pictures of him. There's one picture of him with what appears to be a crack pipe hanging out of his mouth, and he's passed out. So there's a lot of stuff here, and they're going to keep trickling this stuff out. The FBI seized once the computer store owner said, "Hey, because the guy worked on the computer, and then he tried to get a hold of Hunter Biden to get him to come pick it up, and it was never picked up." So finally, I guess he realized what he had, and he called the FBI. The FBI had come and seized the computer. So that could have been the end of the story, except that the guy had made a copy of the hard drive and then gave it off to, I think he gave it off to, trying to remember which person I think he gave it to Steve Bannon, I think is what happened. But
that could be. But since that time,
all that information is in
a Chinese guy came out and said that China has a couple of 3 hard drives of information about Hunter Biden, damning information on Hunter Biden. Now, why the Chinese would want to help sink Biden's campaign, I don't know.
Well, I don't think the Chinese would want to sink it. The Chinese would want to hold sway over the Bidens, however, because if Joe gets elected, then they've got the keys to the kingdom, baby.
Well, that's true.
As far as public policy is concerned.
Maybe it's opposition to the CCP. That's probably who it is.
Anyway, this is Steve Bannon addressing this on One American News.
And joining us now to break down some of the findings in this New York Post report is Steve Bannon. Now, Steve, I understand that you've been following the whole Biden-China ties for a long time, but the most recent report coming out today highlights not necessarily Hunter Biden's ties to Ukraine, but this one is more so China-oriented.
I've always said the Burisma part is dwarfed by China and the CCP. Today, you see the Biden and the family are not just grifters, and Joe Biden's just not a liar. This is a national security problem. Joe Biden and his family are compromised. I don't think Joe Biden could get a security clearance right now, a confidential security clearance. And people in San Diego at the 32nd Street Naval Station where I was stationed on a destroyer understand that a guy like Biden right now being compromised by blood money from the Chinese Communist Party couldn't get a security clearance. I don't know how he could possibly be commander-in-chief.
And previously, when we would talk about Hunter Biden being on the board of Burisma, we were talking about something around $50,000 a month, something like that, what I believe was the initial claim, at least around the impeachment saga. But I want to read one line from the New York Post really quickly. Another email sent by Biden as part of an August 2nd, 2017 chain involved a deal he struck with since vanished chairman of CEFC, Ye Jinming, for half ownership of a holding company that was expected to provide Biden with more than $10 million a year. I mean, is that the type of sums that we're talking about here? Not just $50,000 a month, but from one company, $10 million a year?
Oh, that's just remember, that's just the fees that are being paid. That's not the joint venture equity. The key to that story is that Joe Biden got 10% of the joint venture. The Chinese put up all the money. And remember, this company, China Energy and CEFC, China Energy Funding Corporation, are two of the most corrupt companies owned by the Chinese Communist Party. It's now in bankruptcy. They were putting up that type of money at $10 million a year just in fees for introductions and for working on the project. The Bidens also owned a huge slug of the equity, and that story talks about how it's divvied up. Joe Biden himself, right, owned 10% of that. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. This is just not $10 million in current cash flow. Between the $1.5 billion they've got in the private equity fund, these different deals and joint ventures they're doing with these Chinese Communist Party companies, you're talking about billions of dollars. This is where Joe Biden, where the real wealth, this is what they were doing, selling access to Joe Biden. Remember, Joe Biden on the stage at the Council on Foreign Relations, he bragged about that he's had 25 hours, more than any world leader, of private one-on-one meetings or dinners with President Xi. Those transcripts have never been released. We've never had a readout. This is my point, Alex. This is a national security problem. This is just not about graft and corruption. That's what Burisma was. This is a national security problem. And one of the keys is the FBI has had this hard drive since the fall of 2019. They protected Biden against Bernie Sanders and all the other components. Remember, this should have been released immediately in the Democratic primary and let the Democratic voters take care of it. Also, President Trump would have never been impeached. If all this came out in November, December of 2019, we would have gotten rid of the whole hoax and fiasco of the impeachment process, and we could have focused on, guess what? The pandemic, the Chinese Communist Party virus that then hit us in January. This is explosive, and that's why. Why do you think Twitter and Facebook are trying to cover up for the guy? They understand this disqualifies him from being president of the United States.
All right, I had another clip from him, but unfortunately we just don't have the time for it. I don't know if you have any closing comments.
No, I just hope, I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this because Biden is a national security risk. It'll be interesting to see what Trump does about this. But we don't have a Department of Justice.
Yeah, well, ultimately it's not up to, and there's the problem. You just nailed it. It's the Department of Justice. And so if Trump gets reelected, and that's a big if at this point because they're going to do everything they can to ensure that doesn't happen. But if it does happen, he needs to clean house at the Justice Department, and I mean completely. Otherwise, we're not going to have any country because there's no enforcement. When you get to the level of this kind of corruption across the board, there needs to be enforcement. And the government has been operating under a kind of a good old boys club for many, many years, decades. And it's gotten to the point where the corruption is festering so much that it's literally threatening to bring the whole country down. I mean, I think we're there. Anyway.
Yeah, actually, I do too.
Well, we're
on that happy note.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll leave you with a smile. There was a news anchor in Alaska. She just came out. In fact, the Daily Caller reported that Mayor of Anchorage, Alaska, announced his resignation Tuesday after he admitted to an inappropriate messaging relationship with a TV news anchor who reportedly posted nude photos of him online and allegedly threatened to kill him.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So she put out this very explicit laden. She says, and this is all allegedly, but Athens allegedly left the mayor a voicemail in which she called him a Jewish piece of living effing excrement and threatened to kill him. She says, according to the Anchorage Press, I'm so blank exposing you, I'm going to get an Emmy. So you either turn yourself in, kill yourself, or do what you need to do. I will personally kill you and your wife, my GD self, you Jewish piece of effing, expletive. So,
hell hath no fury.
Yeah, I did a little looking into the woman, and according to her Twitter account, guess what she majored in?
What?
Diplomacy. So there we go.
That's great.
We got to go. We're out of time. Pray for this republic. Do what you can to restore it. God bless you, folks, and thank you very much, Vicky. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.